Hi everybody, this is Scott Sandler. I'm actually here with Raquel from our class. I want to walk you through the final exam. I want to walk you through the study guide questions that you guys came up with. I won't go through every single poem, but I'll go through some of the poems, some of the shorter poems, and I'll walk through the questions and give you some ideas of what I'm thinking about in terms of the questions. And then I will also post these later to your site. And I'm going to go over these in no particular order, just whatever tab is up first. And so the first one that we're going to look at is One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. A lot of you in your discussion boards pointed out that the losses intensify in each stanza. Moving from something like losing a watch to losing a house to losing a river, a continent, finally to losing you. So I want to go through the questions that came up. In the poem, what does Bishop mean by being a master in disaster? That idea of disaster keeps coming up. And so Victoria was asking about that idea of mastering disaster and what does that mean. So that's something I will think about. Alicia asks, what about the parenthetical comments? Like if you look at the last line, though it may look like write it, like disaster, why pause to give you that parenthetical there? What is the significance of that? That's a question that I really love. Araceli wants to know what's the significance of the title One Art. Selena says, what do you think the author means when she says, this is line 7, practice losing farther, losing faster? Do you think she intentionally wants to lose things? It's almost like here's a how to lose and how to cope with possible pain in losing these things, right? Or how to not become overwhelmed. What do you think she's trying to say? Selena also asks us to look at so many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. That's up here in lines 2 and 3 in the first stanza. How might the influence of the poem change if the author decided not to include write it? That's down here. What if this parenthetical was missing? So that's Jose is asking that question, and it kind of echoes what Alicia was asking about why the parenthetical in the first place. So I might think about that idea of the parenthetical. And then finally Jose wants to know, why would the author give losing such a positive connotation, right? By calling it an art. Why does the author call losing an art form? So those were some of the questions that I was most attracted to with One Art, and I'll post those questions. And if you want to talk about any of these before the final, maybe we could do a dialogue through our questions forum. Let me pull up another one at random. Okay. Whoa. So we're really hopscotching around here. So we went from one art to Buffalo Bills. So this will be a quick one to read. Buffalo Bills defunct, who used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? There are a few questions that arise. Two of them have to do with the word defunct. Right? We usually don't think of a person as being defunct. Maybe a toaster or maybe a piece of software. But what's it say that we're using the word defunct to describe a person? So Yesenia says, what does defunct mean in the story? And do you think using the word defunct makes the speaker unsympathetic? Why or why not? Or does it make Buffalo Bill seem unsympathetic? Why or why not? Chris Chambliss is asking about the spaces in this poem. And you'll see this is also in Spring, where sometimes he crams words together, like Eddie and Bill. If you remember in Spring, Mud Luscious, Puddle Wonderful, he plays around with spacing and coupling words together. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pigeons just like that. Why do you think he's stringing those together? But then also, why these spaces? For instance, the word Jesus. Why is it spaced out like that? It certainly calls attention to it, right? Or the word stallion. So E.E. Cummings is famous for playing with spaces, and so think about what might the spaces convey in the poem. Where does he want your eye to? What does he want your eye to hold on to pause? What does he want to emphasize? So just think a lot about the spacing. Okay, that's Buffalo Bills. Jumping around, let's see. We jumped from Adrian Rich to E.E. Cummings to Langston Hughes. A number of you did Langston Hughes for your explication paper. And the one I think that was covered more than any of them was Mother to Son, right? It was a class favorite. So let's read it real quickly. Well, not real quickly. Let's read it, and then I'll go through the questions. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I've been climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark, where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back, don't you set down on the steps, 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey, I still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Okay, so clearly there are metaphors being used in this poem, right? So when we are told life ain't been no crystal stair, what might the crystal stair symbolize, right? What does it mean that you have a staircase that has splinters and boards torn up, right? We can look at the staircase as perhaps a way of mirroring one's path, one's road, how easy it was, how difficult it was. Maybe to contrast different people's lifestyles. But the question here that Yesenia is asking is, what if there were no metaphors? What if instead of life for me ain't been no crystal stair, life for me hasn't been easy, right? What's the benefit of using these metaphors? How would it change the poem if those were missing? Okay. Anthony asks, what does the author mean when he writes, and turn in corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light? So what's the significance of that? That's one of my favorite lines of the poem. Here, it's right here. And sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light, so boy, don't turn back. So think about the mother and her own journey, and what does it mean to turn corners? What does it mean to go in the dark? How would the poem changed if the colloquial language was removed? Here we've got a lot of, this is a dialect poem. It's mirroring the way that trying to mirror authentic spoken language. So here, for I's still going, honey, I's still climbing. What if it was grammatically correct? For I am still going, honey. For I am still climbing. What would change if we took it away from this voice to try to be like standard English or correct grammar? What would change in the poem? Anthony asks, what does the staircase represent and why? And then Araceli wants to know, what if the mother and son poem rhymed throughout? How would that change the mood? Now we do have some, let's see, we have stare, crystal stare, and bear, right? But there aren't a lot of rhymes. What if each couple lines we had end rhymes? How would that change the poem? What do you think Hughes is doing by being so spare with the rhymes? So that was Araceli's question. Okay, I'm hoping this is helpful so far. Okay, so now we're not going to jump to another poet. We're going to jump to Harlem. And I'm doing this one because it's short. And so it's easy to cover in this Google Hangout. Harlem, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Yesenia asks, what if the poem was not written in a way that asks questions? Right? So this entire poem is a question, or at least a couple questions. No, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So what if these were statements and not questions? How would that change the poem? That's what Yesenia would want to know, and she's also interested in the word explode. Does it explode? What do you think that means? I read in one of the explications someone had mentioned that does it explode is italicized. So clearly it's supposed to stand out. What do you think that might mean? Chris wrote that question. Why is it italicized? Chris also says, how would the poem be different if the question wasn't just answered with more questions? That kind of goes back to Yesenia's comment about the questions. What if this were written in statement form rather than a string of questions? So those are all good questions. Okay? The Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So let's look at the questions. The questions come from Jose, so thank you, Jose. He says, although written in the first person, right? I've known rivers, my soul, I bathed, I built, I looked, right? First person. How is the speaker able to convey that the soul is truly about the collective body of the African American diaspora and not just him, right? Is this poem just about one man's experience, or does this have to do with a collective experience? And if you believe that it's about a collective experience, not just one man's, even though it's written in the first person, how is Hughes able to convey that? Okay. You might think about the four rivers that Hughes uses to connect the soul and heritage of the African American community. For that, you might have to look up Euphrates, Congo, Nile, right? But clearly these he chose these rivers for a reason. Look and see where they're located. So that would be up to you guys to look at these things. Okay? So that's the Negro Speaks of Rivers. Let me move on to, hold on one second, to Wild Nights, Wild Nights. This is Emily Dickinson. Wild nights, wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Right? So it's saying, I'm not with you, but were I with you, the night we would have together would be filled with luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port. Done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, ah, the sea, but I might moor tonight in thee. And certainly mooring in thee has sexual connotations in this poem. Raquel asks some questions about Wild Nights, Wild Nights. She says, how do you interpret the lines, futile the winds to a heart in port? Right? So think about the contrast between something being in port and the movement of rowing in Eden. Right? So think about movement in this poem. Why done with the compass? Why done with the chart? Why are these things futile to a heart in port? How might the poem be read differently if we were given a backstory of the speaker and her lover's romance? Right? There's not a lot of information about these two people. We know they're separated by the sea. We know that were they with together, might I but more. There are all these kind of like hypotheticals, like if we were together. But who are these lovers? Do we know anything about them? We really don't. So what impact does that have on the poem? If we were told this is like Gail and Henry, and they went to high school together, would it change the poem if we had a lot more details about it? Would it diminish the poem in any way? Would it enhance the poem? Are you fine with the with not having the details or backstory? Okay. All right. Aunt Jennifer's Tigers. We'll jump to that one. I'm hoping this is helpful. I'm just looking for the questions. Here we go. Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across a screen, bright topaz denizens of a world of green. They do not fear the men beneath the tree. They pace in sleek chivalric certainty. Aunt Jennifer's finger fluttering through her wool find even the ivory needle hard to pull. The massive weight of Uncle's wedding band sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand. When Aunt is dead, her terrified hands will lie, still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. The tigers in the panel that she made will go on prancing, proud, and unafraid. Okay, the questions. A couple from Raul. He says, why does the speaker feel a massive weight on her finger while she is working on her tapestry? So keep in mind the idea of weight throughout this poem. We do have the massive weight. We have something being hard to pull, but we also have kind of some lightness in the prancing. And in terms of and prancing actually bookends this poem. You see it in the opening, you see it in the end. So think about that idea of weight and why does it sit heavily upon her hand. What do you feel is the theme of the poem? Do you believe the message is still relevant? I like this question because it's open to many different interpretations. Chris asks, why do the last words of each line rhyme with the line before it? Screen green, tree certainty, wool pull, band hand, lie by, maid unafraid, AABB throughout. So, what is the impact of that rhyme scheme? Rhyme scheme can have an impact on the way that you, on the mood of the poem, right? Or the emotions within the poem. Why do you think she uses rhymes in here? Do you agree with the author that marriage oppresses women? Well, certainly Aunt Jennifer seemed oppressed. Do you think that that's what Adrienne Rich is saying? Just based on this poem. I mean, I know some of her other thoughts about marriage, but I just want to focus on this poem. Alicia says, why does Rich choose to focus on Aunt Jennifer's hands and fingers rather than another characteristic of Aunt Jennifer? Right? So look at that middle stanza. Her fingers flutter. Clearly she's the one pulling the needle. She's the one upon whose hand the massive weight sits. And those hands were the ones that created this tapestry. So why the focus on the hands, on the fingers? Really good question. Why is Aunt Jennifer's wedding band described as a massive weight? Alicia asks, which is similar to Raul's question. So I'll consider those. Okay, so let me go through the questions in some of the longer poems. We have the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Alicia says, why does Prufrock say, let us go then, you and I, in the first line? How does this line set the tone of the poem? Does this tone remain constant throughout? Alicia also asks about the ocean imagery. And if you remember the poem, we've got the crabs scuttling across the floor of the ocean like ragged claws. We also have mermaid imagery. So why all this ocean imagery in the poem? What does it say about Prufrock when he mentions mermaids and how they will not sing to him? That's Alicia. Jose says, what comment does Prufrock make about women in town? So think about how Prufrock talks about women. First of all, he sees the women come and go, talking to Michelangelo. Right? We've got that sing-songy rhyme, and we get almost a sense like there's kind of a lightness or a shallowness or a surface quality to these women. So why does he use that kind of rhyme to talk about women? He also looks at women's arms and looks at the brown hair on their arms. He also talks about women in other ways throughout the poem. So look at how he's describing women in the poem. And what does it say about Prufrock? What does it say about his desire? What does it say about his connection or his lack of connection with women? What do you think it's saying? Jose also asks, in what ways did Prufrock's character make him incapable of action? Right? A lot of this poem has to do with kind of being anesthetized, right? Like a patient etherized upon a table. He's got a question. Does he dare to bring that question to the surface? A lot of this has to do with, oh, there's time to do that later. Time for visions and time for revisions. A lot of it has to do with stalling. Why do you think that is? Look at how Prufrock is characterized throughout the poem. What do you think informs that kind of lack of action in the poem? Okay, the longer play, A Raisin in the Sun. I hope you really enjoyed A Raisin in the Sun. Raquel asks a couple questions. What would have happened if the story would have ended right after the Younger family moved into their new home? What could have we discovered? She also asks, what do you think about Walter Lee Younger's decision of giving all the $6,500 to Willie Harris without consulting the family first? Those I thought were a couple of the two strongest Raisin in the Sun questions. So that's something to consider. Let's see, Birches. Anthony, what does the narrator desire to do? What does the tree symbolize? Why is the narrator so fixated on climbing and swinging from the trees? Why does the speaker like to think? Oh, what does the speaker like to think when he sees birches bend to the left and right? That's Araceli. And then finally, how does Frost seem to consider truth versus imagination in the poem? That one I'm really interested in, that Araceli asks, right? It's something grounded in a real setting, but at the same time there are some fantastical parts of the poem, right? Does he really see the birches being weighed down? Is this in his imagination? That's a good one to play with. 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. We had one question from Anthony that I really gravitated to, looking at how Wallace Stevens moves from one image of the blackbird to the next, and what is he trying to accomplish by looking at these different visions. In what way are they related? In what way are they different? And finally, do I have a drum roll? Oh no, there are two more. Two more that's being asked. One is of the fish, which is one of my favorites. It's the Adrian Rich. So you might think, throughout the poem, describe the speaker's feelings toward the fish. And if I asked that, I would ask you to illustrate that with the text. You might also think about how the narrator uses, how the speaker of the poem uses personification, almost describing the fish like a he, right? So using that personification, why do you think the poet chooses to use that? Does that convey any feelings about the fish? Look at how the fish is being described. Look at imagery, right? The ribbons, the use of the gray beard of wisdom. Think about that imagery, and does that convey anything about the speaker's feelings toward the fish? Finally, and I'm sorry that I've been holding it on this Aunt Jennifer screen so long. Let me just close out some of these tabs. Okay. Alright, well that's enough. I won't drive you crazy. But finally, in The Great Gatsby, compare and contrast the characters of Tom Buchanan and Jay Gatsby. That's what Raul's asking, so I'll really consider that. And Victoria asks about the symbolism for the green light across the water from Gatsby's house. So you can see that green light at the end of Daisy's Dock. We get that idea of the green light throughout the book, throughout the novel. What might be the significance of the green light? So those are the questions that I'm leaning towards. As I wrap this up, I'll remind you that I'm going to put the questions written down on our announcement board. The final is going to take this exact same format of the midterm. You're going to have 4 hours. You're going to have 10 questions that are adapted from from your questions, and then 5 of my own, and then I'll ask you some extra credit, just like last time. Don't leave your computer screen untouched for too long. Like if you leave it untouched for over 20 minutes, it could lock you out. So show them that there's some activity. Meanwhile, you could also save some of the answers on a separate Word doc, just so you don't lose anything. And then if you have questions about the other poems, because boy, there were a lot of poems that were not even brought up, if you want to talk about any of those poems, feel free to ask me, put it in the Questions Cafe, or just send me an email directly. Raquel had asked me about Prufrock, so if you look on the announcements page, I gave a lot of thoughts about Prufrock. She also asked me about
the tigers,
Aunt Jennifer's tigers, and so I put some thoughts in the announcements on that as well. So if you have any questions before the final, let me know. I'm gonna wrap this up because it's already gone on way too long, but be well, everyone, and if you have questions, just ask. Thank you. Bye. And now let me see how